what I would like to talk about today is a very interesting idea on how we manage our personality constructs in the world. In other words, our sense of identity in the changing environments that we find ourselves in the day. Some of these environments could be natural conditions, natural earth conditions that are changing, or natural social conditions that are changing, where you are in a social structure and your behavior is expected to be in a certain way, but you choose to naturally flow in that progression. You see, one important thing I find for many people to carry out through their day is an appreciation of the time they're giving to the activities they're doing. In other words, when you appreciate what you're doing, you really feel you deserve it. You are engaged with it. You need to interact with your environment so excitedly and so consciously and really that you receive the fruits of the moment. Every moment has fruits within it that can help us. We're literally sitting beside trees of knowledge, wisdom, and social awareness. When we become aware of where the light is shining from, we can see that we need to also acknowledge our shadow identity. What that means is that there is a part of you that you don't like, acknowledge its presence, and there's a part of you you like, and acknowledge that presence. There's a Native American Cherokee, if I'm saying that right, saying that says that there within you there is a bad wolf and a good wolf. There is peace and there is war. There is harmony and there's disharmony. And regardless of the positioning, but there are these two viewpoints which a human being has in regards to its engagement with its environment. You as an awareness have that. When you acknowledge the good and the bad, you see that what you find bad is destructive behavior, destructive elements in what created a sense of good. If I say good is this state, when this state changes, it could be bad, regardless if it's getting better or not. As I acknowledge my own presence and my own meanings within me, I see that sometimes throughout the day, I might do something which I feel less value within myself. I see less value, or I see more value. I try and tend to have days where I see more of an existential value. So it could be even, for example, a random homeless person asks you something and you give that. And in that moment, you're very selfless in your giving. You're not giving for a reason or for a certain action. You're simply giving a nice, communication to life, regardless of who it is. Whether it's some guy asking you for money, or it's you're helping someone, or you're picking up trash. When you're experiencing it through the moment, the value of the experience is more important than what you get out of the experience. To experience the experiencer is more valuable than to find a toy in the experience. Now, in regards to identities and what that could mean, in my view, of course, with the amount of observance I've given to the idea, I see that your environment defines who you are. So if you are in an environment where you're not prepared and everything's more advanced than you, you're less advanced. You're into that definition. If you're in an environment where you're more advanced than anyone else, for example, you're in that condition. You're in that definition of a state of being, which you put. Now, when we communicate with others, we understand what's here. Human beings are receiving communication by simply looking at one another, by simply being in the presence. We receive information from how our presence is engaging with what else is present within the moment, another person's presence. However, when we communicate, we're using labels, and it's very important to sometimes know, or in your communications with others, to let know that you're not the label. In other words, you're not this person because you're a changing process. You're not, for example, a bad person. You're not a good person. You don't have to be anything, but because you're as transparent as a piece of glass under any colored cloth, You embody what is present within the moment to give you a defining expression of a being. Now, through this expression of being, which is your movements throughout the day, your experience navigates into making different stories and programs more real for you. In other words, you're late for a class, or you're late for your work, or if you are behind in some endeavor, that story is engaging a sense of you which you're paying attention to. However, regardless of the identities we go through, we realize that when there is a new identity, there is a new condition, there is a new process of change we must become aware of. If you're someone who finds that you are depressed or stressed out based on ideas of yourself or how the world is treating you, you need to understand that the first question you should ask is, how am I treating myself that I'm feeling depressed? You are the most immediate cause point of your existence. You are your source of whatever you see, you know. Think about the sensitivity of experience you have when you can close your eyes and literally experience life without visual stimulus. It's the stories you attach to visual stimulus that create um, heavy thoughts which affect you from non-physical as well. Throughout our day, our identity should be a natural process, and we shouldn't really think about how to be. We simply need to be ourselves and let that flow. You need to allow your awareness to be perceived. You need to see the awareness you already have when you're not just focused on an idea of yourself. With that, your experience of everything becomes much more beautiful. It becomes much more relevant to your existence. Because some processes, some stories, some things we're introduced to and welcome throughout the day are not helping or not serving our existential process in that way. In other words, they are in a sense of that you're experiencing life, but they don't need to be relevant to where your energy is going. You see, before I find someone becomes a visionary or an effective human being, they must see the vision they have of themselves. Similar to how you look at the beautiful scenery of what is there, you look at that. You also need to look internally at how deep and how capable you find yourself and how present you find yourself. A lot of depression and stress comes from how you are interpreting time in your life and the value it has. You need to see if you will be comfortable if all your processes stop, if you would still be comfortable with existence. If you literally had nothing, you had no defining element, you had no material object, you literally had no face, would you be comfortable with the presence you have? How long can you close your eyes to see that you can still see, regardless if your eyes are open? Throughout these conversations, when I breathe very deeply, it's because I'm allowing my thoughts not to accumulate into too much of a solidified structure. Because if you literally sat down and thought about something all day, you would shape that in your vision that you would see it everywhere. To allow yourself naturally to see things means you are so excited about how you're being expressed throughout the day that you don't need to define a certain action of what will become your expectation of the day. You don't need to expect anything. You can follow your routines and understand that as you become slightly more sensitive and tune into these natural harmonies of expression that is you in this cyclical existence, there is then a more peaceful flow to your day, to your thinking, to your studying. You know, a lot of our mental problems have an existential answer. It's when we are observing the thought that we can best handle it or come up with the solutions that really serve us. When a solution doesn't serve us, when you have an idea about something to do, it doesn't serve. It doesn't serve you if it's only serving an idea of you. When you realize your existence is much more grander than your material relationships, which are molded into a mental spectrum of, of mental activity, of neural passages. When you are no longer stuck on how you are working with the ideas you have, and you allow yourself to perceive what is naturally working, then your thought process becomes much more harmonized. Your physical energies become more harmonized. It is up to you. I could be sitting in a library. I could be sitting in my, anywhere. But there are times throughout the day which I feel a need to just sit on the grass, to look at nature, to be comfortable with the stillness of this process. You see, every person from the moment you're born, you have a life process you're going through. Do these things, do this. All you're going through all these changes until you reach the last change with these eyes, which is death. Similarly, you can see other life forms are going through this process of change. If everything changes, you know, in that changeless space, we're all the same. So our understanding of infinity and our eternal nature becomes slightly harder when we are really stuck on why we are formed the way we are. If you try to form eyes to see a formless world, you'll always be behind. You'll always feel um, that you're searching for something you cannot have. How you search for your solutions or for the answers to many of your problems you think you have is very important. Some people read books, some people duplicate what others are doing rather than paying attention to how they balance, how they exist throughout their day. When it comes from a centered place, when it comes from a place where you're not just limited to the ideas that you are slightly overwhelmed, you begin to act naturally. You begin to sit comfortably. You begin to throw away many acts that are keeping you an actor in a very bad written script, for example. You don't have to be a certain someone. You know, as you are your natural self, you discover that nature is very gentle in its progression. In other words, change is done as a known process when you look at nature. But for the human being, when the human being has defined its material existence to have such a value, so to be more important, where human beings are looking into how to become immortal, that is not accepting natural progression, natural existential progression. But this also doesn't mean we dissolute in there is no mind, there's just existence, even though that is very valid as our experience becomes more collective. Um, you need to look at how many ways you want to look at this life. Some people want to carry the same job and literally look at the same thing every day, life process, or maybe it's not the same thing. It's a new day, of course, but same activities. You choose the range of energetic expression of how vibrant your energy is. You choose if you want to have amazing laughs, see amazing things, feel amazing, or you just want to have a certain range of feeling. You know, a lot of people who depend on substances or depend on anything. It could be even food to feel good. It could be on movies. It could be whatever. When you depend on something, your state of being is no longer just being adjusted by you, by by what you are interested in. The substance really affects the substance of your life, the substance you have your attention on. So, if you do choose to take substances to elevate your experience, you need to understand that it's not about the substance, it's about the experience. It's not about the physicality or the certain solidified relationship of physicality. After a certain range, you can amplify your creative awareness throughout the day to everything. You can literally look at small relationships and see extremely large relationships through them. You can see extremely large relationships and see extremely, the other spectrum is extremely small things. You can look at a grass and you can look at existence, look at the universe. You could look as the grass through your own eyes. Consciousness is not mentally directed. In other words, even though the state of mind shows how much awareness you have to your environment and to your existence, but the governing function of consciousness is beyond an individual intelligence. Therefore, there is this collective natural energy within existence. In other words, a person, for example, a lot of Native Americans, or I want to say, actually, let us take our eyes and to look through the eyes of a Native American. Let's say someone my age. If I was back at that time and I was in a beautiful, natural scenery and there was no structures, it was just tree and nature, I would recognize that throughout my day, I would see fascinating things. I would appreciate what nature brings, whether it's a tiger surviving in the way it has to, or whether it's a snake on a tree, or whether it's a fire ceremony. Regardless of whatever it is, my experience would be very valuable because I would see it as the experience of everything else. When you're with nature, you become selfless, you become more healthy because you don't have those unhealthy selves, your attention stuck on those unhealthy selves, which are creating the intentions behind your actions. So if I was back then, there would be moments, perhaps 100%, where if I, for example, searched throughout the jungle, went through my flows of movement, and suddenly saw myself in front of an amazing waterfall. And for example, you see an animal behind the waterfall, you see fish, whatever you see the moisture in the air, and you're perceiving this. I would take a moment and just experience the connectivity of what I am perceiving with who I am perceived as through my own awareness. Integration must be introduced, especially to kids, in my view, in a healthy way. In other words, when a kid is being brought up, they need to understand the existential value they have. They do not need to be defined and molded into something which they will put their attention on every day, but it will become the wrong model of a sustainable presence, It is simply an act of calibration. In other words, when you're sitting in nature, when you're alone, when you're with your own stillness, you realize you drop all the acts. You want to get to the experience. You want to get there. Literally, you forget about all the stories. You sit here and you experience your presence and your connectivity, and you realize it's fascinating because there is an individual relationship of my separate body in this time-space continuum with the earth, with everything I can touch, with, for example, the shoe in my hand, with anything, right? With the beads, However, through this separation and through the observance of the separation, you can perceive the connectivity that can consider a separation. In other words, you can have a connective experience, but also a separated acknowledgement of life. It becomes ecstatic because you realize your body is not just limited to this form, and so you experience things without a certain clouded mist that hurts your eyes to even open, for example. Life is very playful. Nature is very playful. A snail goes up a tree and falls down, for example. And there's nothing wrong. There's no judgment. It goes back to its natural flow. When you judge your body on your solidified idea and your material value, only you see the material value of who you are. If you only think you're this body, you're limiting yourself from a greater existential experience you can have as the awareness, as the experiencer. The experiencer is the experience. It sees itself through the experience. It reflects through the experience. It doesn't matter if you look at a mirror and you feel that you're looking at yourself. You could be looking at everything and you receive this knowing that this consciousness that you are, this awareness is all permeating. It is omnipresent. Religion points out very big ideas, but the way it points it out is too firm. Religion should not be institutionalized it should be communicated naturally. In other words, you take the prophet's principles, any prophet anywhere, and you look at their principles and you look at life. Similar to what scientists do in taking rules and laws and certain approaches towards experimentation and finding truth and compare it with what is life. Regardless if you are a religious person, you're a spiritual person, you're a whatever category person, you should compare everything you're aware of with existence, with what is here, and then harmonize a greater value of yourself in which it provides vision. At times, someone doesn't need to tell you what to look at. When you harmonize with earth, when you naturally progress as comfortably as every leaf that comes out of a tree to enjoy the sun, when you exist in a natural, harmonious way, an honest way with yourself, you can see where we're going, where humanity is going. When you're comfortable enough to acknowledge your own presence outside of any limitation you consider and its material structure, when you come out of the structures you've built, you then can receive information and experience through an explorative excitement within the moment, which develops into a knowing of what you need to do. In other words, you develop a strong intuition. Intuition is the gut feeling which is always tuned in with what you feel is the right action, regardless of whatever. Regardless of the number of good moral stories your parents told you as a kid, you can naturally tune in and harmonize and see what the right action is. You can see that you're not picking up a piece of trash, for example, because of another human being or to look cool or any other image. You're taking it because it's a natural flow within you. It doesn't need to be there. Similarly, or in other words, you develop a more open approach to your own life, and you see all the doors that were closed never needed to really be closed. There never needed to be that slight judgment to create impossibility in your life. Live life with full possibility. And you need to understand that because we're in a more denser environment, in other words, if I throw something, it's more of a cause and effect rather than an instantaneous manifestation. Your knowing becomes instantaneous after some point as you self-reflect. You get instantaneous knowing. However, in its application in this wavelength of physicality, it becomes more delayed. There's actually a delay. In other words, in your subtler realm of imagination, creation with an adjustable awareness of memory, if you really look at what is memory and you become comfortable with your inner space, your inner mind, or your inner eyes, some people call it, then you realize instantaneous creation is present there. You can imagine anything I tell you literally. You can begin perceiving my words. The imagination is coming in on an instant knowing level for you. But if you were to write this down, if you were to communicate it, there would be a delay. At times I find and it's a good thing, how sometimes I find my words just communicating smoothly to a degree where I am not really putting values on what I'm saying to think that it should have a certain outcome. At times the words are natural. It could be me saying sentences, or it could be just me saying, oh. It could be anything, and it's a natural approach to your moment of experience. When you have a natural approach to your moment of experience, you realize that decisions become much more easier. Your awareness becomes much more easier. Your orientation becomes more clear because it is the orientation of the natural expression of existence of the planet, how the planet is working. And with that, there is always a beauty in our own construction and destruction. Because sometimes a lot of people are afraid of destruction. If the body falls apart, if my idea falls apart, would I go insane? Would I go crazy? No, you simply become aware of a different space of existence when you're being deconstructed, similar to how you're being constructed. If I make a new house and you go inside that house, you will literally get a feeling. You're like, oh, this is different. You'll have a new experience. But if you're in the house and I'm breaking the house or something, or whatever the house is tearing, falling apart, that is also an experience for you as well. It is not insanity. Insanity is, in my opinion, unadjusted communication based on the reality that a group of people agree. When we say that person is insane because he's talking things that are not real to us. So That person needs to go there. However, that person is alive and that person is tuning into some form of experience of this life. And insanity does not need to be a disease in which cures are needed. There is mental clutter. So, in other words, your experiences create that at a very early age. For example, if you were hit by a car, if you were hit with a spatula, if you were hit by your own hand, or you made a mistake. The mistakes that people take, it gives you experience, but at the same time, it keeps a mold of how you were in that experience that affects your future. So therefore, to really self-reflect on your past opens up a lot of these a lot of these knots that don't really need to be there in your experience of the moment. In other words, you can become a person who, for example, this is not my field, of course, but if someone wanted to be a surgeon, that surgeon can look at, for example, a body that's whatever in the surgery process, and literally go back to its past experience naturally, subconsciously, and be like, oh my God, I don't like dead bodies or this or that or whatever. But then realize that he's a surgeon, and the surgeon acknowledges it in the present moment. He makes his discomfort a problem to be accessed and to immediately be given an answer to. He handles his experience of the moment by not bringing mental clutter from the past. See, sometimes proofs are needed. Proofs are rebellious actions, even in regards to the world of math or science or anything, or even in the law court, you know. Regardless of how we're judging a world to even need to prove something, when some problems dissolve in our awareness because we no longer need to keep them in that state, the answer becomes the higher state of awareness that you are now. Albert Einstein has a very beautiful quote, and a quote which should be very amplified in elementary schools or primary schools or whatever school, degree in school, hopefully at a young age, that you cannot solve a problem with the same level of consciousness, as the problem was created. You literally need to tune your awareness. You need to observe a thought. Einstein had what you would call thought experiments. He would sit down, I believe, and look at light. And if I'm not right, relativity came to him in a vision of him moving through a light beam. So you need to amplify your creative process by amplifying your state of consciousness, and therefore you become naturally more creative. You provide more creative answers to all your problems. Self-awareness is a very true experience because it is making you aware of where your truths come from and what your origin is. And when time and space fade in definition, when we are here and now, the knowing is there. We are simply translators of whether we want to write poetry with our voice, or we want to write books, or we want to engineer technologies, or we want to make a better world be perceived by other units of existential attention, and other beings, other awareness. We need to know that we are very efficient and capable creators. It's just right now our operating system is very unnecessary. We have greater operating systems in regards to our intelligence. We can work with a more collective and integrated sense of being, which really is the abundance. You're not looking for abundance. You are so abundant in your experience that abundant things are just sprouting any moment. It's a very beautiful. This should be a very beautiful take on the law of attraction. However, to understand that your greatest attraction comes from finding your most polished and clear sense of yourself. If you're unclear yourself, don't be afraid of self-reflection. Sit down on the grass, sit down beside a tree like the Buddha, and literally analyze your problem and observantly detach from what you are continuously bringing your experience that is creating depression for you. Handle your problems with a greater sense of consciousness and awareness by interacting with it, engaging with it, becoming self-reflective. When you're self-reflective, you're looking at yourself from different angles. You're looking at yourself from lighter angles. And as you do, the darkness in your life begins to fade because it never needed to be there in the present, similar to how there never needed to be that light and darkness relationship. There never needed to be a duality to make you think that your values um, are always changing and you need to, you know, follow one value. You need to just become rich in life. You need to just become healthy. You need to, whatever you need to become. You know, it's nature is your adjustment into working with existence for a greater world. Always experience this. Understand that if you acknowledge a lot of problems that are outside of you externally, it is always good to reflect within yourself. Go within yourself and become aware of how you're experiencing things to then discover that sometimes attuning in your experience can shift all your problems. It can show you the solutions that are standing beside the problems and are, in a sense, in the problems, always communicating to you. Through a very loving approach to life, you will see more love in your life. And to a very more alive approach to your life, you will literally be more alive. You will feel and experience more of your livelihood. And that is a beautiful relief. To have bursts of happiness without any definition is a very good state to have. It's why not feel happy where you are? Because happiness, your mind is less triggered into thinking in survival mode and making decisions under stress. You can make your decisions on a very harmonized and abundant level of your experience. Live in life in ways that you find eternity and infinity beyond definition for yourself. Much blessings ahead, and always look at yourself through everything. You are here, and it all begins now. Thank you.